All right, we'll go ahead and get started since it is 10 o'clock on the dot. Welcome to Mental Toughness, using the principles of positive psychology to manifest our resilience and grit. Amie and Anna will be presenting today. I am Danielle Daly. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here with Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. I'm just going to do a few housekeeping items, and then Amie and Anna will take it away. As always, you are muted and your cameras are disabled. Please use that chat box throughout the presentation to interact. I know that Amie and Anna monitor it well. So if you have any questions, comments, please be sure that your settings are set to everyone and not just panelists and hosts so that everyone can see your comments. Please visit our website, icpn.org. You can sign up for our upcoming webinars. Our next webinar in the Positive Psychology series is on January 31st. It is on positive relationships. Registration is not currently open on the website. Hopefully will be open by the end of the week. But I would encourage everyone to sign up for a mailing list so you can be aware of when that opens. You can also sign up for the mailing list via our website, icpn.org. Professional continuing education certificates. Please give me about 14 days to get those out to everyone. They will come to the email that you registered with. So by clicking on the link, you are accounted for today, and your certificate will come via that email address. Again, please give me about 14 days to get those out to everyone. I think that is all I have. Anna and Amie, if you want to take it away.
Hold on, I was arguing with my mute button. Danielle, do you want to just come back and tell folks about the annual conference really quickly? Because I know we're going to have that open here in the next few days.
Yes, thank you for the reminder. So we will be having our annual conference this year on March 5th in Springfield and March 6th in Naperville. Our theme is going to be about leadership and empowering people through leadership. We have 3 speakers. We have Dr. Karen Harvey, Dr. Jason Buckles, and we have a pharmacist, Chad Kodiak, who will be presenting for us. So please be on the lookout for registration to open. We are hoping to have registration open on Friday. Again, if you're on our mailing list, you will get that information the moment that registration opens. An email blast will go out, and then reminder emails will be sent as well. But please check it out. Like I said, March 5th in Springfield and March 6th in Naperville. And CEUs will be provided for that.
So there's a question about virtual programs are now required to have a test according to the new law for IDPFR. We are continuing, ed comes through the Department of Human Services. And so at this point, we are not offering a exam. Is that the correct answer, Danielle?
Yes, there's a post-webinar survey that does get sent out that everyone is supposed to fill out. That then gets sent to us. But I know there are some issues. Sometimes it doesn't pop up for everyone, but please do fill out that survey. There is no, like you said, in accordance with the Division of Developmental Disabilities, there is no exam that needs to be completed.
Okay. So we are here to discuss mental toughness. It's a series in our positive psychology series. Anna and I presented on an overview of positive psychology. I think we have done the power of moments, and we have the power of relationships coming up. Still, we have sort of a conclusion of all of them happening in February. And so this is one of the components of positive psychology is resilience and grit. And so we sort of added those together, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Anna will give a brief overview of positive psychology for those of you that didn't attend. It's not important that you attend all of them to attend this one, so you'll be able to follow along just fine. So the reason for sort of that grunge theme, when we were talking about being resilient and being gritty, we sort of I don't know, stupidly, maybe thought that our generation was more resilient, could manifest grit a little bit better than the current generations. However, a quick sort of literature review proved us wrong in that topic. This is my daughter and her two best friends who are Generation Z kids through and through. And so I sort of challenged them with that. And they very quickly disagreed with my thought process that we as Generation X, and I'm a Generation X kid, Anna's a cusper of a millennial and a Generation X. And so this Generation Z, Madeline and her friends, felt that the world is far more competitive and way less forgiving than that of their parents and grandparents. And so they felt that it's not so much about resiliency, but rather the strain that comes with challenges that other generations did not really have. And so with social media and internet, their argument is that they never really get a break from their problems. They're with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so in order to sort of stay relevant and current in society, that was with them all the time. And so in sort of switching our thought process a little bit about grit and resiliency, the rates of anxiety and depression have increased almost 59% since 2011. However, prior to that, there's not a lot of data, and it wasn't really talked about, right? Like people didn't ask me when I was growing up about mental health and things of the sort. And so just in all fairness and just being a good sort of practitioner, just because the data is not there doesn't mean that the numbers aren't there to support that. It's that we don't have the data to sort of compare it to. However, it's definitely a trend that we're seeing now, and it's definitely real that anxiety and depression have increased. And so we sort of took a step back and agreed that, the world is hard, and it's hard regardless of sort of what generation you're in, and that every generation is sort of shaped by their own unique problems and challenges, and you sort of develop resiliency and grit accordingly. However, we were far too into the training to sort of switch. And so we stuck with the grunge theme. Because we do think, even though the data doesn't there, that maybe we are a little bit grittier and a little bit more resilient.
I agree.
We're going to stick with that.
Yep.
So for those of you that don't know this, I'm Amie Burke. I am one of the directors of the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. I'm also a behavior analyst. And my co-presenter today is Anna Vivanti. She is a social worker, a behavior specialist, and sort of jack of all trades when it comes to ICPN. She's done a lot of different roles for us. And so we, in sticking with our grunge theme, busted out our Halloween picture from a couple of years ago. And so I told Anna I was going to surprise her. We like to, most of you have been to a training where we presented before, so we like to do something different. And so she's like, don't ask me anything I'm not going to know the answer to. So I'm like, don't worry about it. So my question for you guys to sort of answer in the chat box is, what was your favorite time or moment from late 80s, early 90s? Like, what about that time period sort of resonated with you? What is it for you, Anna? MTV, yes.
I think about my middle school dances. Like I have a middle schooler now that doesn't even want to go to dances. And when they go, they say they don't dance, they don't talk to each other, they all sit on their phones. And it was like the thing was we couldn't wait for our middle school dances. So that's what comes to mind, those awkward interaction moments with, males, females, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Skating rinks. I worked at a skating rink when I was a freshman in college at the community college. So I have a lot of memories of the skating rink as well.
Yeah. So mine sort of resonates with a lot of people in the comments that, I mean, it just comes back to, I feel like I would agree with what Madeline said, that I lived in a simpler time. I could leave my house and come home before dark, and my parents weren't really worried about the world, and corrupting me as a result of being out of the house. And they sort of knew everybody. I grew up in a small town. And so I would agree that, no cell phones, no social media, none of the things that the kids deal with nowadays, that sort of helped us build grit. We figured it out. And so, yeah. So thank you all for joining us today. We are going to encourage you to use the chat box as we sort of go through this and ask any questions that you have, and we'll go ahead and get started. So Anna's going to start with sort of an overview of positive psychology.
Okay, so I'm hoping that most of you have joined us for the first parts of our series. Like Amy said, if you haven't, that's okay. For our first, Amy and I actually opened up the series and did an overview of what positive psychology was. And then we've had a few breakouts since then, power of moments, flow, and we'll have one on relationships coming up. And then we'll kind of wrap up the presentation again with Amy and I, where we're going to talk about some of our favorite applications of positive psychology. There's hundreds and hundreds of things you can do, which is the great thing about positive psychology, depending on what pillar you're looking at, how you want to incorporate them in your life, how you want to go about it. But we're going to talk about some of those different applications for the final series. So we'll just do a little bit of a recap again, in case you guys missed the first session. So psychology's overarching theme is that it's the scientific study of well-being. So positive psychology can get a bad rap sometimes. People think that it's just those willy-nilly things, thinking positive, your Buddhism, like that sort of thing. And that's very, very incorrect. It is research-driven, evidence-based strategies. Yes, it is a newer portion of positive psychology, but there's some real applications that we can use in our lives, as well as working with people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, dual diagnosis, and mental health. So it's very applicable to what we're doing. The big thing with positive psychology is that we are looking on strengths instead of weaknesses. So if you guys remember, Seligman came across and brought this notion of positive psychology. Prior to that, our psychology models were based on what was wrong with people, right? Like our pathologies, our distress, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, those sort of things. Our treatment modalities, our therapies, everything were based off of tell me what's wrong, tell me about your upbringing, tell me about trauma, which is a great piece of the puzzle. But what we're figuring out is that we need to work on what our strengths are and how we can use those to foster our relationships with people, how we can be happier human beings, and really focus on those. So I had stumbled across positive psychology during the pandemic. Like everyone else, most people, I was kind of slammed at home. Kids were home, life was just wacky, right? And I wanted to learn some new things. So I was just kind of flipping through podcasts and came across one on positive psychology. And they talked about like lifelong habits, your overall well-being. And I'm like, sweet, like check, like I need these things right now, right? Like I don't want to focus on my anxiety and my depression and being home. Like, what can I do to make the best of this? As leadership, like what can we do to support staff through this hard time? What can we do for the individuals we're supporting who are home from day program and not seeing their family members and things like that? So it was really important to me that I started learning about something like positive psychology to focus on the positive and the things that I have control over in my life. So focus on positive events. We're going to talk about those experiences, which we talk a lot about: joy, love, inspiration. The traits or the states, and the big buzzword right now is gratitude. We all know the importance of showing our gratitude, practicing our gratitude, resilience, which is what we'll be talking about today, and how important it is to have our fuel tank, our gas filled up, so that we have that resilience to be able to help us through situations and be able to bounce back quicker and in a better state. And then our institutions. So how can we take these and apply them to our life, to our marriage, to helping our kids, to our Scylla homes or SODCs or ICFs, whatever is we are working, what can we do to better ourselves, but what else can we do as an agency and as a community to hopefully, become better people. So positive psychology helps us move forward. So again, like some of the other psychology institutions, we're not looking about what is wrong. We're looking about more of a solution focused, how can we move forward, right? We all know that we have stress in our life. Stress isn't always a bad thing. We'll talk about the stress response here in a little bit. And it's not about avoiding stress. Stress is always going to be there. It's always part of our life. And research shows that some stress is actually good for us. But it's always going to be there. So what it does is it helps us create an environment, a platform that we're able to move through stress with more resilience, more grit, be able to get out on the other side in a more healthy, meaningful manner. A lot of research is coming out, and most of us know this about what actually makes us happy. If we were to ask this a couple decades ago, we would probably get things like, looking good, money, that status, that sort of thing. But actual research is showing us now that optimism, self-esteem, having good friends, having meaningful relationships, having things to do in our time to make us feel good about ourselves are way more important than we had thought. And those aren't just hokey ideas and notions. Those are actually showing us that they can change our pathways and our biology and our stress responses of how we're handling things if we're really focusing on those things that are important in our life. Discover the critical difference between the kind of good feeling of pleasure and lasting gratification. That's a big one. So a lot of times Amy and I talk about, receiving text messages or answering a call or social media is that quick shot of dopamine you'll hear us say a lot. That's not the long lasting gratification that we're talking about. We're talking about finding meaningful relationships, ways to spend our time, people to surround us with that has an effect on our long lasting serotonin in our brains. And again, that biology makeup and not just those quick shots of dopamine. Okay, so we talk about this a lot. We brought it up in the first session, and then probably they brought it up the second two presenters after us. So basically, this is our roadmap. This is our vision board, right? So if you are like me and you need kind of a direction as to, okay, I want good well-being, I want meaningful relationships, I want to flourish is the buzzword, right? These are the pillars that the categories that Seligman has come up with that help us pay attention to certain things in our life. And once we pay attention to these, we can make a conscious effort and a decision to work on these things, like I said, very deliberately, so that PERMAH, all of those different pillars you're working on simultaneously, and we can put them together to work on our overall well-being. We're going to talk today about the resilience and the grit. That's part of the relationship pillar. But again, you can fit a lot of different things into different pillars. So I don't want you guys to get too stuck on, okay, if I want to work on gratitude, what pillar does that go in? If I want flow, what pillar does that? Because a lot of them can go in different areas. But as long as we're taking different components and working on this is a really well-rounded roadmap for, the positive events that can influence our life. So power moments and flow both fit into this PERMAH model. And then today we are going to talk about resilience and grit, which again goes in the relationship connection, but that's okay. You don't have to memorize that one. Do you guys still have, or do you need that PERMAH worksheet sent out? Or most of the people that are joining us, have they come to other sessions, or do we need to send that back out? Just let us know in the chat box if you guys want this one again. Okay. So Amy, you can go to the next one. So this is just a short list of what Amy and I came up with. And we came up with this list a couple of years ago, actually, during the pandemic, of what we were all experiencing. And it's still pretty true, I would say, today, as we say, post COVID, although I know the COVID's kind of having an outbreak here again in our Arcelas and places, but increase in burnout, tired and overworked, lack of motivation. It's hard to focus. People are getting sick and we're overstressed. So this is what Amie and I are experiencing are these things right here. Would you guys agree with this? Are you guys feeling this? Because it's a real struggle, right? Like, especially for me, the burnout is huge, right? Not only are we motivating ourselves, but we're motivating as leaders, our DSPs, case managers. Like, we have a lot going on. We have to motivate everyone across the board when that's high, and that's really hard, right? Which comes to lack of motivation is digging in deep, especially in the winter. It's cold. Coming out of Christmas, like it's hard to become motivated right now. Attention or harder to focus. This is one that I feel like I've completely, since COVID, just like whoosh out of here. Is I used to be able to focus really, really well. Now I find myself like a squirrel, like all the time. I'm thinking here, thinking there, doing that. And it's almost like annoying to me. Like I catch myself doing it and I'm like, all right, Anna, like get it together. You need to think about one thing at a time, because we know that multitasking isn't effective. We know that we need to focus on things. But I mean, I literally will be working and then making a grocery list and then thinking about basketball practice and thinking, did I turn in a timesheet? Just things like that. So that's one that I've really, really struggled with during the pandemic, as well as coming out of it right now. Amie, what are you feeling the most out of that list?
Well, I definitely feel overstressed, a lack of motivation, harder to focus, all the things, right? And sometimes I feel like because the world is short-staffed, like where did the people go sort of thing, I'm finding it hard to even, like, I have a to-do list, but it just keeps growing. And so it's hard to even prioritize. We used to sort of triage, and it seems like everything is such a big deal now that it's hard to figure out and even get started. And so, yeah, I think COVID brought some of it to light, but then there's other things that just, are sort of new problems. And maybe it's because of COVID, I'm not sure, but yeah, I definitely, sickness is not something, that I'm feeling particularly on that list. I made sort of my health and a priority during the pandemic, but everything else, it's definitely sort of a struggle for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you've done really good with health over the pandemic. I feel like we're kind of one or two sides that a lot of people took that time to find hobbies and exercise and things like that. And then people like my husband worked double time over pandemic, had gained weight, has more stress and things like that. So I don't know, if I could go back and redo it all again, I would definitely do a better job prioritizing my health during that time.
It's funny you bring up your husband, because I'm sitting here with my Starbucks coffee. And when I went to the drive-through this morning, the lady said to me, so I ordered a blonde roast, just a regular coffee. And she's like, oh, did you want to add a shot of espresso to that? And I was like, is that a thing? Like, you add a shot of espresso to coffee? And so I texted Anna and said, I opted for no, because I already have to remind myself to slow down because I talk too fast. Like, I couldn't imagine doing this with. And then I said, but I feel like that's something that Vince would do, which is Anna's husband's name. And she's like, oh, it's extra shots all the time.
Multiple times a day. Yes, it's yeah. I didn't even know that people didn't know that was an option.
No. Anyway, we digressed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's our focus that just shows where we're at. And I was thinking too, as you were saying that, like, people are wired to be, back to our list, people are wired to be negative. People are negative by nature. And I remember during NAQ, I think it was NAQ last year, the year before, somebody was talking to me, Ben Thane Dykstra, about negative thinking and why we are like that. And the reason is because it's easy. It's easy to think negative. It's easy to go down that rabbit hole really quick. It's easy to focus on what is wrong, what you're feeling, like this list that we made. That's easy. Like, coming up with this list, it wasn't rocket science for us. Like, we're like, oh, check. This is what we're feeling. It takes a lot of work and training of yourself to think positively. You know, research and studies will show us that there's great benefit to positive psychology, but why aren't we doing more of it? Well, because it takes work, right? All of those pillars that we talked about, all take a deliberate thought process and action into changing the way that you're thinking, your thinking patterns and things like that. So, you know, I guess maybe we should have also come up with a list of things we're experiencing that are positive. You know, like I always talk about during the pandemic, there are positive things that came out of it. I was home with my kids, which I'll complain about, but at the same time, it gave me the opportunity to see them every day, play with them outside, start pickleball, read more books with them. Kids in the neighborhoods were playing together, things like that. So, I mean, there are some positive things if we really flip the script, and that's what positive psychology lets us do. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. So the circle of stress. So the stress response is really, really, really fascinating to learn about. There's tons of podcasts. If you put in the stress response, there's always a section in every training that Amie and I do that she rolls her eyes at me and is like, oh God, here she goes again. This is that slide. There might be another slide later on if you're lucky. But I love learning about the biology, and what is happening in our brains with our chemicals and how we can affect that and how it helps us move through the lifespan. So there's a lot of research right now about stress and how that affects our resilience. So this is the easiest way of how I could come up with to show you guys kind of just what this pattern looks like. So high stress leads to low resilience, right? Like that doesn't seem like, yeah, that makes sense, right? But why is that important? Without our resilience, that's what makes us respond in an unhealthy manner to situations. So if you think about it, like Amie could walk into work one day and her stress is, it's okay, it's moderate, right? Low in there. And I could ask her a question and she could be like, yeah, that's cool. Or yeah, I got time for that. And we go about our business, right? Now let's fast forward a couple of days when she woke up and had a high stress morning, started taking calls, whatever it is, she comes in, her stress is high. I could ask her the same question and get a total different response. And that's not picking on Amie. That's not saying anything about that. That's the way that we work, right? When our stress is high and our resilience is low, we don't have that fuel in our tank to be able to respond in a healthy manner. So that is where we become irritable, angry. You know, we don't think about things. We just are in that fight mode, right? That fight or flight. It takes a lot of energy to maintain resilience, right? That's what we talk about positive psychology, making sure our resilience is high. When people become stressed, they are exhausted and they don't have the time or the energy to maintain that resilience, right? So when that happens and we're in a high stress situation and we need that resilience to kick in to help us through that situation, we don't have it. There's no gas in our tank for it. So that's when we start coping in this unhealthy way. And we all have the ways that our body has responded or that we've learned to cope, right? When we are feeling stressed. I know that for me, I am very, very irritable. So if I come home from work and I had a high stress day, I will snap at my kids for stupid reasons. My husband might ask me something and it's a very unhealthy way of responding if my resilience is low. Now, if I've done a good job about paying attention to my thoughts during the day, keeping my resilience high, things like that, then I'm more prepared to kick in that resilience when I need it. So saying, I had a really hard day today, I don't want to talk about it, or I had a really hard day, can I go for a walk for 15 minutes and clear my head, that sort of thing, so that I'm able to act in a healthier manner. You know, sometimes people eat sugar or overeat or don't eat when they're stressed. So we all have different ways of coping. So what are your guys' way of coping when you feel like your stress is high and your resilience is low? Amie, what do you do? I have a couple of ideas of things you do. Let's see if you name them.
Well, some of them are not real therapeutic.
Yeah,
So,
that's okay.
I, so one good thing I did is I did take up Pilates during the pandemic and sort of, so that is very important to me. I prioritize making the appointment that I scheduled. One that's maybe not as healthy, but man, do I love it, is I love online shopping.
Yep.
I love coming home and getting a package from Amazon. It's exciting. Is that what you had in mind, Anna?
Yeah, I did. Yep. And again, it goes back to that shot of dopamine, right? Like getting that automatic, you're getting it multiple times. You're getting it while you're scrolling it. You're getting that hit the cart. You're getting the buy, and then you're getting again when you go in that doorstep and you see it and open it, right? So you're getting multiple shots of dopamine for your resilience bank, right? So it's not the most adaptive way, but it's how your body has coped and learned to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you chose, when you wanted to work on that, then you would say, okay, so I'm going to be more cognizant of my online shopping. I'm not going to peruse Amazon when I'm in a high stress situation. I'm going to stop and notice my body. Am I stressed out? If I'm overly stressed, I'm not going to shop right now. Like you could work on those things if that was something that you chose that you wanted to target.
So far I've not chose that, just so I'm being completely transparent here about what you guys are dealing with. I've not chose to work on that.
Amy's love language is buying gifts for people. So I'm not going to stop her either because I get to be the recipient too sometimes. And it's all about balance. You do a great job with your Pilates and working out and things.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So I talk quite a bit too about one of my favorite books is The Resilient Practitioner. If you haven't read it and you do like to read clinical type books like me, it's a great read. But one of the reasons that I really, really liked The Resilient Practitioner is it talks about the cycle of caring. So the skills that we practice on a daily basis are exhausting, right? We have to have an intense focus on perspective taking, flexibility, tolerance for ambiguity, and effective sensitivity. We do those things all day, every day. Think about your current role, whether you're an administrator, a clinician, a Q, a nurse, whatever it is, you've probably already used these skills and it's not even 10:30 in the morning, right? Staff have called in, somebody had a med error, staff was upset and you had to think about it from their perspective. You had to be creative and thinking about how you're going to get them to work because the buses aren't out, whatever it is, you guys have already used all of these skills together. And that is exhausting. We're in the helping profession, right? So we have a constant push and pull between caring for the people that we're providing services for and our own lives. So we go all day about taking care of other people. We're in the helping profession, right? We serve people with dual diagnosis, high behavioral needs, whatever it is. We go all day taking care of people, whether it's doctor's appointments, therapy, getting staff in the home, whatever it is. And then guess what? We get to go home or deal with it during the day at our own home, right? Most of us are taking care of either children or pets or aging parents or a husband or some sort of other job that's making us also use these skills to do that in our own lives as well. So there's this constant push and pull all day long that we're feeling when we're working in the helping profession. I just think about like my husband, like Amy said, he's very high strung. He works a lot. He's works at like I hate when people ask me, like builds big machines, engineering type of stuff. And his stress is very, very different than mine, right? So he's dealing with millions and millions of dollars, engineering and blueprints and all this stuff. And he comes home stressed, of course, so he has a right to be stressed. But when I come home, I could be more exhausting. Like I've done a therapy session with someone trying to work them through trauma or worked with a sister on how to, things like that. So it's just totally, totally different. in how we are experiencing our stressors throughout the day. So what the cycle of caring is, it talks about this, this circle here about how we attach, we're involved, we separate, we recreate. So this happens over and over again. So when we attach to somebody, that could be when we get a new referral, someone new moves into our agency, we start a new job, whatever it is, and we're going to work our butts off to build a rapport with the person. We're going to build our team. We're going to put all our efforts into, you know, our having this leadership role or getting our team on board, whatever it is. And then we're going to be involved. So that's our creating, we're going to create those supports. So what is our therapy going to look like? What's our ABA going to look like? What's their daily schedule going to look like? How are we going to staff the home? How are we going to create this environment that is setting our individuals up for success? So that attached and involved is our heaviest section that we're working on, right? It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of these skills and stabilizing and creating these supports that we need. And then we separate, right? So maybe the person aged out, maybe they were discharged, maybe they passed away, maybe they moved to a different home in your agency and you're not the queue anymore. Whatever the reason is, a lot of times we separate from them. And then guess what? We get to start all over again. And we do this with however many people are on our caseloads, however many people are at our agency, however many staff we're working with, because we know staff quit, right, or leave the job a lot. So we're doing this over and over with this training process as well. So just think about it. And I don't mean to age you at all, Amy, but think about how many years have you been in this profession?
I started in 1991.
So do that math for me. How many years is that?
Somebody in the chat box will do it.
Danielle.
A long time.
32. Geez, that was fast. Okay, so 32 years you've had this cycle of attaching, being involved, separating, and redoing it again. Think about that. How many clients you've served, individuals you've supported, how many staff you've supported. Multiply that. You've had thousands and thousands of times that you have done this cycle over and over and over again. Now we're going to add in those extra layers of facing an imperfect system, right? I mean, we live in the state of Illinois. We have crappy services. We have no money, right? We have inadequate funding to provide the supports we need. We can't fill clinical roles, let alone our DSPs. We have an aging population that has a lot of needs that we aren't doing so well, probably meeting their needs. Our medical care is, I would say, collapsing as far as being able to find adequate psychiatrists, medical doctors that work with our population, working with people with dual diagnosis, and we're trying to build a team all at one time. So guys, like, I give credit where credit is due. Like, this is a lot, right? So this is why the cycle of caring and having our resilience is so important, because if, again, we don't have that gas in the tank, how the heck are we supposed to get through this over and over and over again? So that's what the resilient practitioner talks about, is just that aspect of being in the helping field. So resilience, again, is the pillar there in the relationship. So it offers our effective interventions and approaches to work on our well-being. But a huge part of this is resilience and grit, right? Filling up our gas tanks. So today we're going to introduce you to just the concepts of resilience and grit and how it can hurt and propel us. There's obviously a ton of different books, research, podcasts on resilience and grit. We don't have time to get through even like a tiny bit of it today, but just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what it is, so you can hopefully do, again, that lifelong learning of figuring out what it is you can do to work on your resilience. So this is a definition. I've read a dozen definitions about resilience. Basically, it's your ability to bounce back, adapt. One said, like, fall down, stay down, reflect, and get up again. How to face adversity in a healthy manner. So there's tons of definition, but this is just a really good, concise one that I had found. It's not about being nostalgic, right? Like, I miss it when it used to be like this, or like Amy and I said, like, the 90s rocked, right? Like, let's go back to being that. Although I would argue that it was the best time. It's not about that. It's about looking forward and how we can realign and be flexible when we're off of our trajectory and get back on again. You can go ahead and go to the next one. Okay. So here's another, and I'm going to try to keep this as easy as I can here. This is our fight or flight patterns or our responses, right? So there's a very, very complex automatic response that we have that takes place in our bodies that we don't even have time to think about or reflect on. So this is just kind of a real easy breakdown of the fight or flight response. So basically, we're going to see a threat, right? We're going to perceive a threat. We scanned, yeah, something is definitely going on here. So then our nervous system is going to send the noradrenaline, right? So that's when our body feels that response, our physical symptoms. This is when we start feeling our heart race, maybe our hands get clammy, we start feeling sick to our stomach. Some people will get diarrhea or vomit, things like that, because of that response that noradrenaline is being sent to your body so quickly. And then we're going to feel our response, right? So that adrenaline is released, our heart rate goes up. Oxygen is delivered very, very rapidly to the different parts of our muscles and our digestive system. And that is for a reason, right? It's amping up our body to be able to physically take on what the situation is, whether it's fight or run, right? We still need that energy to be able to run if we're going to do the flight pattern. So all of this happens in 3 to 5 seconds. And it's a complex hormonal process, right? It takes so much of your cognition, your focus, your hormones are all going, your immune system, your digestive system, all of these different parts of your body are all being signaled at the same time. So what's important to know about this is that this is a normal process that takes place. There's a lot of, and I actually talk about it in our last training, but there's a lot of research out there, some really cool stuff that talks about your cortisol levels and your waking cortisol levels and how that will, what you wake up with in the morning biologically affects how you're going to respond the rest of the day. So if you wake up with high cortisol levels, you're going to respond more irrationally. You're going to flight instead of fight, all of these different things. So I'll get into the cortisol behind your resilience yeah, you give me that face, Amy. I'm going to teach you about cortisol. You wait. But it's important to know because if we can affect our cortisol levels, so if we know that we can affect them, that will help build our resilience. So Amy, when you're doing your Pilates all the time, your cortisol is lowering. That's an effective strategy for getting your cortisol levels down. When your cortisol is down, your stress is down, and then your stress pattern can happen at a healthier manner, right? So that you can perceive that fight or flight, and you can use the one that's the healthiest for what you need at that time.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I just, when you nerd out, I kind of like to make fun of you, but I definitely, I buy what you sell for sure.
All right. I like that. Find what you're selling. Okay. Oh, the next one. Okay. So what's bad about this? The stress response is natural. It's a good thing. It happens. But what happens is if we have this stress response that happens all the time, way stress and then leave and then handle another set of stress, right? They kind of had can you hear me okay?
You're freezing a little bit.
Yeah, it just said my connection is unstable. Okay. So let me know if that happens again. So what happens then is in the prehistoric times, they had a stress response, but it was able to go back to a normal state. They hunted, they gathered. If something happened, they would use fight or flight. They would get back to a safety spot again and be okay again. And this would be okay for what we needed biologically. What has happened is this has changed throughout the decades, the centuries, that we have more and more and more stress. and that is changing our body's biology. So when we have a raised heart rate that happens during the stress response, that's when the lack of blood gets to the different parts of our body. And that's when we get things, Crohn's or digestive issues, things like that. It affects our blood pressure and our insulin. That's why we see so much diabetes. Our cortisol, like we talked about, can be good, but it can also be very, very bad. That puts us in the category for stroke, hypertension, not being able to fight off diseases and things like that. So when we keep doing this cycle over and over and over again, and we're not giving our bodies time to get back to baseline, this is when we put ourselves in that category for being at risk for all of these sorts of issues that we hear about all the time in America, right? Like this is obesity, that is all these things are terrible. And then that also responds to how we're going to fight off these things. Are we going to have healthy or not healthy choices? Are we going to overeat? Are we going to keep creating more and more stress on top of it instead of dealing with the problem? So it just sets off a whole nother set of layers on top of this. Okay, go ahead. So hopefully by now you've been kind of thinking about just, okay, so we know why stress can wreak havoc on our body. We know that we need to get to a steady state. But hopefully by now you're kind of thinking about, okay, so what are the things that people who have resilience, have their gas tanks filled, have? So these are the 6 things that research is showing us. There's, if you read different studies, there's one with 6, there's one with 8, but this one seems the most concise, is the 6 signs of resilience. So ability to face adversity, right? We're not always running from challenges. We're able to have communication, open conversations. We're able to adapt to changes. Amie and I talk all the time that we feel like the agencies that came out of the pandemic the best are the ones that were able to continuously adapt and change to the needs of the staff and the people, and the ones that were rigid in their thinking are the ones that either struggled or shut their doors. So adaptation is huge. Your life experiences, we know through research the importance of our experiences and how that can change our biology and our ability, our stress responses, and how we can put that fuel in the tank for our resilience. There's a lot of exciting research coming out on the aging population and resilience. So like me, I've become interested in that because I'm taking care of, aging parents. So how these life experiences have positioned them to be able to accept help, not accept help, their depression rates and things like that. So if they have a higher resilience throughout the lifespan, or they're able to adapt better, they're going to be happier as they age. So that's a lot of things that I've been looking into and trying to understand as I, navigate the taking care of your parents as they age life. Your genetics, we know that that's huge. Your social support and your environment, I'll talk a lot about that in our last session too, is how our environment affects our resilience, how surrounding ourselves with people who are meaningful, are not negative, share passions, cheer us on, are so vital in creating that fuel that we need for our resilience. And then personality, finding people that everyone doesn't have to have the same personality, but what personality traits does it take to be able to look at the strengths and optimism and things like that, and how we can move forward and be more resilient people. Is there somebody, as we talk, that you guys have thought about is resilient in your lives, whether it's someone personal, your mom, your dad, cousin, or somebody, a celebrity or someone that you guys can think of that you feel like has a really good resilience capacity? Is there anyone you can think of, Amie?
Yeah, I think that my dad is certainly a resilient person. I think about, my grandfather, he's not with us any longer. However, I think he was an extremely resilient person. It's sort of like in the beginning we talked about, it's easier to sort of conceptualize resiliency when you think of people that had less and did more, right? As opposed to, I think that's sort of where the younger generation, people sort of perceive that they have all of these things at their disposal. But that doesn't necessarily equate to resiliency. You know, does that make sense? That it's, you know, and people are saying that in the chats, right? Like a mom that, you know, had 9 kids, lived paycheck to paycheck in a working class family. And I think that that's where that grace sort of comes in, that people experience and are able to become resilient with different sort of things that they experience every day.
Yep, that moving through the adversity, and using that to propel you versus harm you.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to end my section here. This is my example of resilience. So anyone who knows me or been to my webinars, I'm really, really open about my family's journey with, this is my stepdad, Dallas. Him and my mom got married when I was in high school. So he's been around for a long time. So I consider him my dad. But this picture here on the left, is Dallas with my youngest, who's now 6. I think this was back in like 2019 or so. This was taken at their home they had built in Oregon. They took great pride in their house. He worked as an engineer his entire life. He loved his grandkids. This was a picture when he had taken her to the park and brought her home. They ate McDonald's, did that sort of thing. They were buddies. So that was what, 5 years ago about. And then this right picture here was taken, it's been about a year now because we did this for a conference, but Dallas was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2018. And then we knew that something else was going on. So he was, after a lot of assessments and a lot of tears and different doctor's appointments, in 2019, he was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. So again, I'm very open about this. I'm very, very close with Dallas and my mom. My mom, I would consider my best friend. They've actually moved to the town that I live in, as well as my sister, to get extra support from us. But the reason I bring this up is Dallas isn't the one that I'm talking about is it being resilient. I'm talking about my mom, actually. When we started this whole process, my mom was a retired accountant, very, very black and white. When I say we went to a lot of doctor's appointments, we went to a lot of doctor's appointments. She had her checklist. What's wrong with him? How long is this going to last? How do I get rid of it? Who can I see next that's going to make this go away? And me being in this field, I kind of knew where things were headed, but you know, like this is her journey. We got to move through it how she wants. She was very depressed, very, very anxious, wasn't sleeping, was not doing a great job. She'll tell you of being a caretaker. It was really sad. It was really, really hard for our family to go through this process of watching this progression here throughout the last couple of years. But I remember one particular night, I was sitting with my mom at her house and she started to cry. And I said, "What's wrong, Mom?" And she said, "You know, it just really hit me that, you know, you and your sisters know Dallas and you know the amazing man that he was and how he raised you guys and everything, but the grandkids won't ever know that side of him. Like, this is the side of Dallas that they're going to know, the confusion and, you know, wearing the diapers and things like that. Like, that's the part that they're going to remember." And, you know, it dawned on me now, my now 6-year-old, that's right. That is what she's going to remember. Right. So I just sat there, listened to her. She talked about the hallucinations that he's having and how it's so hard to change his dependent, things like that. And I just literally just let her talk about it. Right. So I went to bed that night feeling crappy, feeling sad, things like that. But then I woke up the next morning and I had a text from my mom and it said, "I'm going to pick up Gemma today from daycare." And I'm like, well, that's weird. Like, she can't handle anything else. Like, she doesn't pick her up from daycare that often. That's weird. So I'm like, okay, cool. You know, so she picked my littlest one up, Gemma, from daycare. And I was at work still, and I got these pictures sent to my cell phone. You know, the next slide, these pictures. So what she had done is she had done a ton of research, and she had talked to some people from nursing homes, and she had found ways that they could enjoy each other, that she could play with grandpa. And this is the first time that Gemma got to play with grandpa that she remembers, that he wasn't in his wheelchair, that he wasn't in his hospital bed, that they weren't talking about seeing things and things like that. And they do this now, depending on how his week is going, they do this at least once or twice a month. Gemma goes over and my mom comes up with different games, and they're able to play together and enjoy each other. And she now knows that she can play with grandpa. So we're going to enjoy this moment. We're going to enjoy this as long as it lasts. We know at some point we won't be able to do it anymore, but I'm really, really just proud of my mom for being able to be so flexible and adapt and come up with ideas of a solution that, you know, makes everybody happy, not just her, but Gemma and me and everyone else. So that's my example of my resilient person in my life.
Yeah, it's been super educational and heartwarming to watch your family sort of go through this. I definitely remember in the beginning, your mom struggling, and she definitely has become extremely resilient over the course of this. And as of just, you know, recently, you know, last week, sending sort of text messages, finding humor in some of the things that Dallas now does as his Lewy body dementia progresses. And so things that you just are going to happen, and you have to be able to embrace them. So I agree. I think resiliency is a great word to describe your mom in this situation.
Yeah.
So the next thing that we're going to talk about is, we talked about resilient is grit. And so resilience is sort of the outcome, right? But grit, on the other hand, it's the driver. It's helping us to sustain interest in an effort to achieve sort of long-term goals, not short-term, long-term. And so it's a driver that sort of gets us to the end. And so the leading researcher in talking about grit is Angela Duckworth. And she has a book that sort of, if you Google grit, if you research grit, her name will inevitably come up. She is everywhere when you talk about grit. And so she says that it's working strenuously towards challenges, maintaining effort and interests over years, despite failure and progress and plateaus. And so the other thing that Angela sort of says that we're going to talk about is that you don't have to have this natural born talent to be considered gritty, that you don't have to have that to embrace grit and be considered a grit person. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's really developing talents with hard work and positive strategies and embracing feedback and all of the things that sort of manifest grit. And so when we were talking about grit, we were, I was trying to think of a simple sort of definition. And when you think of grit, you know, what does grit mean to you? And who do you think of when you think of somebody that is a gritty person? And I'm always a little hesitant to ask this, because the first time we did, I got like the craziest answer ever. And I was like, oh, I didn't expect you to say that person. So, you know, in the comments, tell us, when you think of somebody that is gritty and that sort of manifests grit, who is that to you? And so this is Anna's daughter, Layla, and her husband, Vince, that we have sort of talked about a little bit. And she is on here because I asked her and my daughter what grit was. And so Layla's answer was your ability to stick with something. Simple, right? That's sort of it. And my daughter, Madeline, said, I don't know, I just can't get past sandpaper. Okay, Maddie, thank you. That's helpful. So then I went back to Layla, because she was clearly going to be a much better conversationalist about this. And so then I said, okay, like who is somebody that's gritty to you? Like when you think of grit? And she said, my dad. And I said, okay, tell me about that. Like, what is it about him that makes you gritty? And Anna touched on this a little bit earlier about sort of Vince and his job. And so that's what Layla said. She said that he misses a lot of things that I know are important to him, like my games and practices, to sort of reach the next big thing. And he's always working and striving towards something with a project. And so that's sort of what grit is. It's that interest over the course of time to reach some sort of next thing. So who do we have that is gritty in the comments? Like, who are people sort of saying?
A lot of my mom, veterans,
Yeah, good one.
elderly who
Good
have
one.
survived decades of life, my dad.
Okay. So the definition that we sort of landed on for grit is from Angela Duckworth. You'd be remiss to not use a definition from her when you're talking about grit. And so it's that passion and sustained persistence applied towards long-term achievements with no particular concern for reward or recognition along the way. And so I think veterans is a great example. You know, Michael Jordan for me comes to mind. Even though I'm in Illinois, I'm a LeBron James fan, but you know, you would sort of be remiss to not think that Michael Jordan is a gritty person, right? Like, didn't make his high school basketball team, but right, he's arguably the second best basketball player in the history of basketball. So it's your capacity to dig deep and do whatever it takes, struggle, sacrifice, stumble, and to achieve your sort of goals that you decide are worthy. So there's two things. You have to have sustained passion and perseverance. And so it's not so much the intensity or commitment to your goals, but that consistency over time. And so it's not so much what you want in the moment, it's a long-term goal. And so that's where that perseverance comes in. It's holding that top level goal for a really long period of time and having flexibility in all of your lower level goals to sort of achieve that. And that includes having hope. There has to be hope that what you're sort of believing is working out. And I think that's where that piece of positive psychology comes into play, because it's focusing on the positive. It's focusing on this self-talk that there you have to believe, right? The sense of belief that you can achieve your goals. So what grit is not? Angela talks about it's not talent. It's not luck. And so we've all experienced things that are short term that sort of fall into our laps. That's not what grit is. It's not how intensely for the moment you want something. So resilience, yes. Ambition, yes. Sticking with it, yes. Perseverance, yes. Commitment, continuing after negativity, that sort of can-do mentality. Always succeeding. Nope, that's not grit, because you're not always going to succeed. Being smarter. Nope, gritty people aren't always the best, right? They have that persistence over time. So I thought this was sort of an interesting success. And so what people see is sort of the top of the mountain, the top of the iceberg, right? But what they don't see underneath is all of the things that sort of happen. And so this iceberg sort of reflects the critical components of grit that we want to help people see and develop, that you have to have dedication and hard work and discipline, and that there's going to be disappointment, there's going to be sacrifice, there's going to be failure, and that there has to be persistence towards that long-term goal. When one of the things that's sort of coming into play when people start talking about grit is delayed gratification. And so earlier, Anna asked me one of the things that I sort of use, and it's immediate gratification, or immediate-ish, right? I'm getting that sort of shots of dopamine successfully across the way. Grit, you're not getting that. You're getting the sacrifice, you're getting the disappointment, you're getting the failure, but yet you're still working towards your long-term goal. So when we talk about Michael Jordan, I thought this quote was pretty impressive. So it says, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeeded. So to me, when we talk about grit, that is what grit is. It's missing the game-winning shot. It's losing, but continuing to get up. It's being cut from your high school basketball team, but going home and locking yourself in your room and emerging with a mission, right? So where does talent come into play when we're talking about grit? Because there has to be a small amount of talent involved in, if Michael Jordan was 5'4", could he have been Michael Jordan? Probably not. And so there has to be a small amount of allocation for talent when you're talking about grit. And so there's a grit equation that Angela sort of uses, and she's used this in terms of schools to help kids that come from different sort of backgrounds become successful. They've taken and looked at like a grit factor in kids in sort of inner city schools and what they need to be successful. And it's teaching them about disappointment and how to overcome failure and things like that. And so what Angela is saying is that effort counts twice. And so you have your talent times your effort equals your skill. And then your skill times your effort equals your achievement. And so that's sort of what grit is, that you have talent and you have skill, but you take each of those and apply effort to it. And that's sort of where your grit comes in. So it's what you're willing to put forth. And I think that if we all think about times in our life where we've seen somebody that has that sort of natural talent, but they don't put the effort into manifesting whatever it is, then that achievement isn't there. I think about like one thing that sort of comes to mind is sports is easy, right? You have the high school person that sort of is just a natural born talent at what they do, but they don't really put anything into it after the fact. Or somebody that's really great at writing, but doesn't really do anything with it, right? You gotta have effort and sort of put that into this equation. And I think that it's easy because as a society, we're sort of enamored with talent. We're sort of enamored with what people are able to achieve. But I think that sometimes we become so enamored with talent that we overlook effort. We don't commend people for the effort, and we don't actually believe that there's this idea that effort plays a role in it. I think we sort of just have this assumption, this overarching assumption that people are naturally good at things, therefore they're successful. And that's not really the case. And so, skill is really, no matter how good you are at something, you have to have effort behind it. You can't just sort of make it on skill alone.
I just had this conversation with my middle schooler last night, Layla, and she struggles in school, just average B's, C's, but she's got to work for those B's and C's. And she's got a lot of friends who get straight A's. And I've never held her at that level. I've always been the let's do our best. Let's keep trying to do better every semester type of thing. And I told her, I'm like, I have never been naturally good at anything either. I was an athlete in high school. I got decent grades. I went to college. I got my master's. But guess what? I had to work my ass off to get all of those things. And people take that for granted. I think my sister's the complete opposite. She's naturally smart. Everything comes easy. She's never picked up a book in her life. And that's okay. But I think that people need to really understand and take the time to think about the amount of effort that people are putting into their lives. And we don't know people's journeys and how they've gotten there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is absolutely true. Somebody said in the chat that talent without effort is like a kite without a string, right? And that's a perfect analogy that, there has to be sort of allocation or acknowledgement of the effort put behind things.
We got a little banter going on, Amy. You would have enjoyed it if you scroll up, you see people talking about Michael Jordan and LeBron, your favorite thing to.
Oh, do I have anybody on my side?
But yeah, there are some LeBron. Yeah, this is that time where I hate that we can't hear people because I would like to get them on and talk about.
I'm not taking anything away from Michael Jordan. I just think Bron gets the short straw sometimes. So the other thing that Angela said is that there's 4 pillars of grit. And so there's this passion and interest, there's a sense of purpose, there's deliberate practice, and there's a sense of hope. And so the first pillar is passion and interest. And so without it, you would give up in the middle of the road, right? And so if you don't have passion and interest in what you're doing, you're not going to sustain that purpose over time, right? And so it allows you, that deep interest allows you to stay focused and survive when you encounter the great challenges. So think about that iceberg that we talked about. If you don't have passion and interest in that, you give up when you fail, right? And that's okay. I mean, not everybody's going to be gritty and passionate about the same things. That's what makes us a great country, is that we all have sort of different passions and interests. But so one of the pillars of grit is that you have to have that. It's really hard to be gritty and have grit about something that you're not passionate about. And so you have to enjoy what you're doing and be committed, because passion sort of guides you towards that dedication. The next one is that deliberate practice. And so that deliberate practice, you have to have well-defined specific goals, and you have to know what the ultimate performance goal is and break it down into small, specific, and difficult targets. So sports is sort of an easy thing to talk about people being gritty about, because it's an easy thing to sort of see failure, right? It's a loss. You don't win. You don't make the game-winning shot. But there also is sort of that deliberate practice. And so, great NFL quarterbacks, they practice the throw 1,000 times. They watch tapes, they watch, they sort of recreate, and there's a mental component to it. And so you break it down and you're into that full engagement and that high concentration. And so it's not daydreaming. It's not mindlessly repeating exercises. It's requiring feedback and knowing all too well what you're doing, what your weaknesses are, what you need to improve upon, and how you get better. And so that's where that deliberate practice is. It's not just going through the motions. It's a science. It's studying what you need. It's embracing failures. The other thing is that purpose. And so without purpose, our success sort of exists in a vacuum. And it's not very satisfying. If something isn't purposeful, it's not that meaningful to us. And so that purpose is sort of what we tie our success to. And so we can be satisfied knowing that what we're doing is meaningful and it connects. And so every gritty person has sort of this overarching purpose that gives them that passion and motivation. And so that doesn't mean that you don't struggle with it sometimes or question it, but the grit is sort of when you have those moments, you push through that. Okay. And then a sense of hope that we talked about in the beginning, that you have to sort of embrace the idea that even in the face of disappointment, you're going to be able to push through it, and know that your expectations aren't too grandiose, or it's easy to lose hope. And so you really have to keep that, because grit is that long-term, that sustained perseverance over a period of time. And so there has to be that hope and that belief that things are going to sort of get better, right? So those are sort of the 4 pillars of grit. So grit is the driver, resilience is sort of the outcome, and this is overall sort of part of that idea of positive psychology, right? And so what we wanted to do, let me check our time, for our last sort of 15 minutes is talk about practical ways that you can sort of develop mental toughness. And so there's sort of 4 practical takeaways that we have. There's developing a growth mindset, which Angela says is one of the things that is makes up grit in a person, is having that sort of growth mindset, embracing that idea of PERMAH. And so in going back to that sort of colorful handout that Anna talked about, and she'll touch on that in a second. And then focusing on strengths and coping with setbacks, and then having that meaningful involvement that we talked about. So the first thing is developing this growth mindset. And so there's 2 things. There's a growth mindset, and then there's a fixed mindset. And so Duckworth recommends adopting a growth mindset. And so that refers to the belief that you can continue to develop your talents with hard work, positive strategies, and embracing feedback, because you don't just get better without there being some sort of feedback. And so ways to sort of do that is acknowledge yourself as somebody that possesses a growth mindset, and be proud of it and let it guide you sort of through your careers. And so with what we do, I think about it as an interdisciplinary team meeting. And so if you sit down at an interdisciplinary team meeting to discuss a challenging situation, whether it's a challenging client that you're dealing with, whether it's something that your agency or specific sort of place is going through, you have to sit at the table being willing to get feedback from others. You have to be able to learn from those opposing views. You have to be able to sort of flip your script and saying, you know, you can do this instead of saying that you can't do this. And you have to be willing to understand that you have to get out of your comfort zone. And so staying in a fixed situation is not going to allow us to grow, right? And so I think that it's important to understand that we have to be brave enough to get out of our comfort zone to foster that growth mindset. And I think this is simple in the sense that look at everybody around you. It takes an interdisciplinary team to sort of understand what it is that each person is going through and what each person brings to the table, and learning from them and taking risks and knowing that you may fail, but that you can embrace that and move forward.
Okay, so real quickly, prioritizing PERMAH. So we talked a lot about, you know, your resilience and your grit, but what would be a really good idea is for you guys to take this handout and go to your next team meeting or your administrator, whoever it is, and start thinking of ideas of how you can start working on each of these pillars. You know, an easy one for the P would be gratitude. What are you guys showing? What are you doing to show each other that you have gratitude for each other? There's tons of stuff out there on gratitude and what you can do to practice gratitude in your work culture or at home. Your E for engagement, which is like the flow presentation that you guys went to, and really working on your attention management, right? Are we putting our cell phones away? Are we giving eye contact? Are we doing tasks that are giving us feedback that make us feel good? Are we looking at our strengths, using strength-based perspective, things like that? Our R, which we've talked about with connections for relationships. If we've learned anything over the pandemic, is that we need people. We need connections with people. And this isn't just for us. This is also for the people that we're providing services to. Stop and take a look at the individuals and what are their relationships? Do they have connections with people outside of the DSPs in the queue that comes to the house? We got to create more meaningful connections for the people that we're providing services to. Our meaning, which is based on our core values, right? Are we living a value-based life? Do we have a value-based work culture going on? And if not, let's take a step back and reevaluate. Maybe you don't even know what your guys' values are. You got to start somewhere, right? So let's start working on what those core values are and living a purpose for them. And then your accomplishment, a really easy way of that is what? Celebrating the small moments, the power of moments, right? It could be anything, deliberately creating a space to celebrate and tell people they're doing a good job, make things, a big deal. I try to really do this with my middle schoolers, really stop and pay attention to the things that she's doing, and creating that moment, versus just fleeing through. So there's a lot of really, easy things that you guys can start doing. But again, it just takes the time to research and go through how you want to start, how you want to move through it, and coming up with an action plan or a roadmap of how you're going to do that. Is this me?
Well, I think this is just simple ways to embrace that PERMAH at work. A lot of them you talked about, exercise. If you don't have a health and wellness program, I know at ICPN, we are doing a step challenge. I forgot the name of it, step up to something. And so our goal is for each person to get 10,000 steps a day. And so we started that on Monday, and I have quickly realized that it is not that easy to get 10,000 steps a day doing what we do for a living. And so I have spent the past several nights walking around my living room, and yesterday it was a little bit easier because of the snow. And so I was going up and down the driveway trying to remove the snow, but man, oh man. We also sort of encourage, a value-based work environment, which we'll talk about, create opportunities for continuous learning. I think that's important. This is one way to sort of do that is through our continuing ed, but really sort of encourage yourselves to learn at your own agencies. The next thing is strengths and setbacks. And so really sort of creating a culture where you can fail, right? And so establish a rapport with your folks and encourage them to acknowledge each other's strengths and put them in situations where you can use strengths. And so there's some of our agencies that we work with take people and sort of move them accordingly to where they're going to be most successful. Not everybody can take and fit into the job of a Q and do that well. Being a good Q and case manager is an incredible skill set, and not everybody can do that. But are there components of that where people can be successful? And so being creative in times of being short in adversity, are there ways that we can be creative to make people successful in the situations that we're being dealt? So coping with setbacks. And so creating an environment where it's easy to ask for and get help. And I don't know how many of you work with people where you're sort of hesitant to ask them for help. And so create an environment where people are okay failing, because analyze your mistakes. Okay, that didn't work, but what did we learn from it? What could we do differently? Are there parts of it that did work? And so, sit down at the table and talk about what can we do differently. So believe in your team and praise their efforts. And so you really can't move forward if there's not some mistakes in there. And so that comes along with embracing that grit and resilience. And so we talked about, that grit is making mistakes and learning from them, but not giving up on what your end goal is. And so I feel like one of the takeaways from a lot of the trainings that we do, whether it's person-centered planning, whether it's writing a function-based behavior plan, whether it's, creating a therapeutic environment, one of the takeaways is don't give up. And that what you're going to do the first time might not be successful, but if you learn from it and apply what did work and what didn't work, you can use that as a learning opportunity moving forward. And so a lot of that comes from us. If you're a leader within your agency, creating an environment where people are okay to make a mistake and not feel like they're going to, be in trouble. And I'm not saying that there's not mistakes that aren't that are appropriate. I'm talking about changing a culture and having a vision and maybe switching to a different type of scheduling wasn't successful, but you tried something different, right? That's the sort of creating an opportunity where people can think and use their talents. And then the last thing we wanted to talk about is really knowing your why. And so if you've been to any of our trainings, we focus a lot on our core values, and that is your why. And so that is the purpose or cause that sort of drives every one of us. And so I encourage all of you to understand what it is that why you get up and go to work every day. And so I feel like this is important because we've sort of took a deep dive into the generations here, and we have to embrace a new way of doing things, right? The new generation is sort of is challenging us to think a little bit differently. And I applaud that. But sort of between this idea of quiet quitting and the great resignation, employees have really reported the lowest job satisfaction in well over 20 years. And so more and more employees are willing to sacrifice job security to find something that's more aligned with their values. And so if we're not creating situations that allow people to align with their values, then we're not going to be able to employ or retain those people. And so that really comes down to building a culture and understanding that a culture is your fundamental beliefs of your organization. And so all agencies sort of have a mission statement, which should guide you, but you should also know what your values are. And so those are principles that sort of define who you are as a group. And so Angela Duckworth defines culture as a group of people who share the same values and norms. And so a culture can sort of exist anywhere because there's a group of people that are in sort of an agreement on how and why things should be done. So if you want to sort of maintain your grit levels and develop this sort of idea of mental toughness, you have to immerse yourself in a gritty culture. And in doing that, you have to know your why. There has to be a hope. And so we sort of have our values across our 6 offices that we do. So we have service. So we believe that we empower people receiving services in community. We evaluate the needs of those communities, and we put those needs above our own. And then we try to find and balance, because that's important. We've identified that as being a core value of the people that work here. And so that's improving and maintaining our overall health. We embrace and drive change because we know that things are not going to stay the same. Our services sort of pivot all the time. We're adaptable and creative. And then we try to be show people kindness and grace when maybe we feel like they don't deserve it, because that's important to us. And giving people a little bit more than maybe they deserve without the need for something in return. And then we have a core value of having a little bit of fun. And so in Rockford, we have done things like we challenged one of our local agencies to a basketball game where we learned that we are a little bit more competitive than maybe we thought, but we had a great day. We had a great time leading up to it, and it sort of gave us something to look forward to, something to talk about, a way to sort of pair with this agency. And so this is just one example that didn't really cost us anything, didn't really take time out of what we were doing. We played on a Friday afternoon after work. Nobody rolled an ankle or anything, so we were in good shape.
And
yeah.
ICPN won, in case there's any Goldie Floberg on the.
Yes, we did. We did actually win. I wouldn't say we smoked them.
No.
But we definitely did win. We are also gearing up to do the polar plunge right now. And so we have a group of, I think, about 10 people that are raising money for Special Olympics. And so we challenge all of you to do the same thing. Yeah. So you're right. We did win with grit. We are a gritty group of people here. So that's sort of it. I don't know, Danielle, if there's any questions or comments. You have about 60 seconds quickly.
Go.
We lost Danielle.
I lost her. That's all right. Just a reminder for you guys that give Danielle 14 days to get CEs out. As long as you use your link that you're on right now, then you'll get a CE. If you're interested in signing up for the conference, that should open on Friday. ICPN.org, where all our trainings are at. And there's also a YouTube link in case you guys want to watch any of the previous trainings that we've put on. You won't get CEs for watching the previous ones, but if you are interested in going back and using those for a staff training or anything like that, you're more than welcome to. And I think that's it. We will see you the next session. And then there'll be us wrapping everything up. So have a good rest of the week, everybody.
Thank you guys for joining us this morning.